Namaste and in la catch, and welcome to this week's episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as I've been doing in the past, I want to draw attention to those two phrases. Namaste comes from the Sanskrit. Spoken, it's called Brahmi. It means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. In la catch comes from the Mayan, and it's also rather interesting. It means I am another you. So consider these things when you're meeting people on the street, friends, neighbors, strangers, all of those, especially now with that kind of attitude, what a difference life would make and you'd make to life. All right. So this week's episode, I have an old acquaintance friend. We met at the ASTD, American Society for Training and Development. It's now called the Association for Talent Development. It was in a leadership meeting in Washington, D.C., actually Crystal City, which is just on the other side of the river. Geoff Woliner was the director of chapter relations for ASTD at the time. And I just had a really wonderful conversation with him. I've always kept him near and dear in my heart, and we've stayed in touch. Geoff, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, my man. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Oh, right. You know, it's a great way to catch up and commiserate and elucidate and do all kinds of really cool stuff. Now, speaking of cool stuff, you went kind of in a really different direction from your work with ASTD, and I'm going to get back to that as well. But you became CEO of Winning Wit, and you started doing comedy, and you've written a book called Leaping 2020, which is kind of a transcendental journey that takes folks through what's been happening. So how did that happen?
Where does one begin? How much time you got?
I know, yeah. Could you truncate that?
You know, it was a great experience with ASTD. I got to meet some wonderful people. I got to meet you too. And very tough crowd. It was really great. And then, but you know, like anything else, you have that inflection point in life. You have that moment where, you know, it's time to move on, and it's time to step into your true north in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. I've been a comedian for a long time, heading all the way back to New York in the late 90s.
So that's where that wit came from.
No, that's the ugly rumor. It's what they say. I can't independently verify it, but now after I left ATD in the summer of 11, you know, I'm driving in the middle of nowhere in Canada. And then all of a sudden, boom, it hit me. A moose, careful driving in Canada. But an idea hit me too, which was, what if I can take my experience as a comedian, but also in the real world, and create a Frankenstein's monster of the two of them, and create a service that can help people really win those big moments in life. And then this idea of Winning Wit was born, where I can take my experience as a comedian and ghostwrite for people who have no experience speaking on stage, who aren't particularly good writers, who aren't particularly good speakers, but have to captivate an audience, be it at a conference or even giving a father of the bride speech at a wedding or anything in between. What if I can be their whisperer? What if I can help them channel all the brilliance they have and all the heart and emotion, and unlock it and let it just flow out to the audience, just create a great moment?
That's a super place to be in, because you can, you've got the wit, you've got the intelligence, and you certainly have the writing ability. What better, you know, what it reminds me is that you, as you were aware, you took those talents and skill set that was developed prior to and during, mm-hmm. and you added a twist of creativity to it that brought it to a whole new level of applicability. And in a sense, we were talking about the unified field earlier. I think there are ways to live in quantum entanglement, mm-hmm. in the unified field, and used to be called living in spirit.
Yeah.
And now I think it's more like finding your perfected form, fit, and function in the world.
Yeah.
It's truly what is fulfilling, right? And until you find it, that life is still, it may be full, but it's not quite fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, to be perfectly honest, it's kind of how I felt toward the end of my time at ASTD. And, you know, due to a few things internally, they kind of shifted me into more of a sales position than a relationship position. And that really wasn't me. It wasn't my spirit. It felt very bottled up doing that. And I said, I have to unlock this and let myself flow in order to let others, because I felt like when you and I work together and I work with other chapter leaders, I felt that I was doing what I was put here to do, which is to help others flow.
And you were great at it too.
And I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you. And that was my love and my passion. And I was excited every day to go to work. But when I felt like I was selling, it never felt like that to me, because selling ultimately had nothing to do with that. Selling had everything to do with me imposing my will on you, me hoodwinking and bamboozling and every other Malcolm Xism you want to use you into signing the dotted line so I can get money. And I get it, makes the world go around, but nothing about that felt right. Nothing about that felt aligned. I said, all right, well, I'm actually at the point now where the only way I'm going to step back into my groove, as I say, find your way back into love, is to create it on my own.
Right.
And I never, and that was 10 years ago, and I haven't looked back since, and it's been a hell of a
Well,
ride.
you know, we've been throwing this acronym around, and the audience may not know what the heck we're talking about. The American Society for Training and Development is a multinational organization, global, if you will, that supports training and development, curriculum development, instructional designers, chief instruction officers, and the like in corporations around the globe. So it's a really, you know, talk about cutting edge in the learning field. That was it, right? Absolutely. Still is, probably.
Oh yeah.
So that kind of, I was at that point president-elect for the Phoenix, or the Valley of the Sun chapter at the time, and so this was kind of my training in leadership, or getting some more of it, which was really enjoyable, and meeting you and many others that really had this notion of, yeah, we can really help humanity, right? Even in the corporate positions, they may not be quite what was wanted, but the attitude, right? It's how we do things, and that's what kind of moves through the field, if you will, that other people sense.
Yeah, very much so. And I felt that energy from the chapter leaders very intensely. These were people very passionate about what they did, not as a job, but as a mission.
Well, most of them were volunteer positions, so
yeah,
we were passionate, right?
No doubt about it. I felt that from all of you, and I felt that I was in a cool position where I could interact with everybody at once. One thing about me, I've always been I'm an ENFP, so I'm a very macro thinker, and you know, I hate being kind of pigeonholed into any one task. I get very bored very easily, and so working with people all over the nation gave me an opportunity to see a lot of different perspectives at once. What were you doing in Phoenix versus what was somebody else doing in Cleveland versus what somebody else doing in Tampa? And okay, well, they're doing that. What if I can make this connection here, and what's applicable here? And then start sharing best practices and facilitating it, and just letting all of you do your thing, and really just being the guy to give you what you needed. That was awesome. That was really awesome. Right.
You know, absolutely. It's so much fun, and having done things with logistics and stuff like that, it's a lot of fun when you can put things together and benefit people. And especially when you're, you know, able to, like, what a description comes to mind is a holistic systems thinker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Because you're looking at the big picture, and you're seeing how it all works, and not just how it, and then looking for, how can I make it better?
Right.
How can I connect people that need each other?
Exactly. Yeah, I had those, you know, when I first got in, they gave me metrics, and they said, okay, here's the deal. You have to hit, at the time, you remember there was this thing for those of you watching, there was a requirement that all the local chapters had. It was called CORE, which was a series of operating requirements that every chapter had to check these boxes in order to be core compliant, to keep their charter as one of the chapters. When I stepped in there in 2008, our core compliance level was at about 32% of chapters nationwide. So it was bad.
Yeah, that's not too good.
It wasn't particularly great. And they said, your goal is to get it up to 70% within 2 years. I ended up getting like the 92%, I think, by the time it was done, but it wasn't about metrics to me. My thought was, the key to this is, if we can get these boxes checked, it will by default kick in a series of systems that will outlive my time here, that will outlive even the board's time in the localities. and create a community and create a home. And then the most amazing thing happened, the financial collapse. A few months after I started, mushroom cloud came up. And then I saw something which really transformed it to me from a job into a mission, which was, if you remember, particularly in not just every field, but our field too, massive, massive layoffs.
Oh, I knew. I met one of the president from Las Vegas, who I think another member of the board, one of the hotels there had 26 people on staff for training and development, and they were down to 2.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And it was just horrific.
Carnage at the time.
Yeah.
And one thing I saw, which absolutely blew my mind, because I'd never really been part of a strong volunteer community before. The chapters became the port in the storm for so many people who were set adrift in the middle of this calamity. And they became places where people could go to make connections, to polish up their resume, to just have a shoulder to cry on and have someone have a beer to drink. This became a family for so many people at a time they needed it most. And I saw so many people get their next opportunities through these volunteer chapters. Mm-hmm. And that was the moment when the light bulb just went on in my head. I said, this is God's work right here. This is important stuff.
Well, and yes, a unified field, the one mind, what I find, and maybe you can reflect on this too, I'm sure you can, is that in this environment with these types of people, there's generally an elevated sense of awareness and even an understanding of higher consciousness to some degree that you just don't find in other, you may find a few. However, the numbers were impressive, as pretty much everybody you talk to, you could dive deep with. And they were there and present. Yeah,
to use the Star Wars term, the midichlorian count was very high. With the force ran strong with them, truly.
Right. And I found that fascinating. That was really heartwarming to me, knowing that these kind of people were actually in the corporate arena. Because many years before, when I left the corporate arena, I worked as a production control coordinator for an aerospace company. And it was good and mixed. Okay. But once I left there, I vowed to myself that eventually I would go back in with some other methodology to make a shift in the interpersonal skills capacity for the development organizationally of companies. And it was a year and a half later that I'd actually brought in the concept to our management, and they asked for a consultant. I brought one in and we had talks, and then 3 weeks later I got demoted. So it's like, I realized it at the time, but I was rocking the boat in a huge way. This was 1987. So that kind of thing in a command and control environment, it's like all the guys are feeling vulnerable now because they got somebody coming in and they're going to expose all these shenanigans, right? Well, maybe. The whole notion was to just get people to work together better, right? And so anyway, throughout that, this kind of, I wondered about being outside the system and still being able to work within them. And this kind of gave me a way to do that and help support others doing the same thing because of the integrity that I saw in the instructional designers and chief information officers and things of that nature. They just have a level of integrity that was a cut above.
I mean, that's the key, isn't it? You see that difference, and you see it manifest in the workplace. You also see it manifest offline. You see it manifest when you ran into them at a conference and there was just this big warm hug and there was this sense of accepting and this sense of family. And, the word inclusiveness is tossed around very liberally these days, but I feel like a lot of people who use that word don't truly understand the spirit of it, the real spirit of it. We got to see it up close and personal because when we were at events, you would always see, people, they'd get together with their old friends and there'd be hugs and reminiscing, and yet there'd always be a few new people. And immediately, without fail, there were always a few people who'd walk across the room, engage them. Come on here, say hi. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm from Albany. I'm from this, I'm from that. You know what I mean? Oh, you have to meet her. She's amazing, from Denver. You're going to love her. And the next thing you know, they're family. No, blink of an eye.
I think we were just all closet extroverts.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the crazy thing, right? And there was this component of, I don't care who you are, I love you and your family, and you know, you're one of us, and that's great. And whatever you need, we got you. And that was within a split second of meeting them. And I had never seen that in my life anywhere, in any setting, quite like that.
Me neither. And, you know, the environment had a lot to do with it. One of the things I learned, it's where we focus our attention, intention, and interaction. And man, what a focus this was of not only personal development, professional development, spiritual development, you know, even emotional development, because there's all these kinds of scenarios that took place in building the structures and the protocols and procedures and processes for the education of the workers.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially that's what it comes down to, right? And in that process, there's this desire for being helpful and doing things that are beneficial. You know, where instead of the running narrative, you know, it's still kind of a command and control thing where, you know, it's kind of pushing us to do different things. Well, you don't find that in this kind of educational thing. What there might be pushing it is the fact that we can all be better.
Right. We can be better. We can, and this radical notion, this is what truly blew my mind when I set foot in this industry, was the idea that you didn't have to hate what you did for a living.
Right.
That was remarkable. I had never encountered that in my life. This idea of not only can you be good at what you can actually enjoy coming to work every day, and we can put in systems and processes and a culture that can nourish that.
Right. And have an effect globally with it.
Yeah. Everywhere.
Yeah.
It was amazing to me. It's just seeing that. Yeah. Every corner of the earth.
So speaking of that, I'm going to get back to that in just a minute, because I want to talk about the book that you wrote and the impetus of that, as far as being able to help people. So your wit and wisdom was applied in how? What's this journey about, and kind of what's the intention behind it?
Yeah. So last year, my business came to a screeching halt, as many others did, because one thing about writing for live events and speaking for live events, it's great when there are live events, and when there aren't, c'est la vie. So I had a little bit of time on my hands, and I figured, you know, last year, you know, paradoxically enough, I felt that I was the very best version of myself that I'd ever been. I stepped into who I always wanted to become, and it took that to facilitate that. And I know that's not an uncommon story when it comes to a lot of kind of mass scale calamities, but this book, it really, I would say, I'm going to say something that's going to sound cliche, but a lot of writers say it, a lot of artists say it, musicians, so forth. They say, when something really profound happens, it doesn't come from you, it comes through you. And this is precisely what happened to me last year. I felt a calling to write this. I felt like this was coming from all different angles, and none of them were from me, this ego, whatever this you want to call this. And I said, it's a message that has to be communicated because some people need this right now. And the main character was a New York City journalist named Sean Gallo. And it took place during the epicenter of the pandemic. We're talking New York City, early April 2020. So the heart of hell. Yeah. And he was in the middle of it. And he had lost everything. I'm not giving anything in the book away by saying this is all just the preface of it. He had lost his only living relative, which was his grandmother. He had lost her to COVID. He wasn't allowed to see her on her last days. He had lost his job due to the pandemic. He had lost his friends. He'd lost his watering hole. He'd lost everything, literally everything. He had nothing left.
Sounds like an old country and western tune.
Oh, absolutely. Willie would have loved this guy. Yeah, this would have been all about it. He goes to the roof of his building, and he takes one look around and he says, I'm done. And he jumped. But that's where the journey began.
Oh, interesting. And we'll have information in the description below. So let's talk about you for just a minute. When you were in the process of moving toward the service to others, let's say, when did you jump? How did you feel that connection and the tug and the experience of that flow within you?
It's an interesting question, because I would say when I first did it, it was not necessarily, I would love to say I did it from a place of service and I did it from a place of, but that wasn't it. It was from a place of, I hated working for other people. That's really where it was. And what can I do to do that which I like and get paid for it? To me, that was what it was all about. And yet through that journey, I realized I was being steered in that direction by something greater than myself. Because even though the motivations, at least on a conscious level, were driving me there, on a subconscious level, there was something much more profound happening, which was driving the conscious, which was saying, you have something you're meant to do here. And even if it takes kind of an egoistic lurch towards it to get you in that place, that's what it's going to have to be. And then once it was last year that really crystallized what I actually had been doing all this time. And realizing that helped. And I think about a lot of the stories of people that I've written for over the years. I think about fathers and daughters who've been estranged. And he was kind of begrudgingly invited to the wedding. And he was given the mic for a couple of minutes and he had no idea what to say. And writing something extremely tender and heartfelt with a lot of really funny lines in there too, was the first step toward rebuilding that relationship and cementing this life forward they're going to have now. And I saw that with anniversaries, and I saw that with proposals that I'd written, and I saw that with even corporate speeches. The idea to motivate a room full of people to actually go out and do something that's going to help humanity, that they needed the right words to make it click. And this person otherwise wasn't going to put them together in the way they needed to be expressed. Little things like that, I realized I was living my truth. I was living what I needed to do through that. And details.
It sounds like a phenomenal, similar process as well. I think we all go through those kinds of things, but what we can look back on at a certain point, it's like, oh, all those trials and tribulations were just kind of moving me along little by little and getting me the skill set, first of all, in the things that you were able to do, maybe not necessarily in the place you want to do them in or like to do them in, but you were building the skill set. And then eventually a point where the universe says, okay, we're going to turn you loose. It's time. Right.
Yeah.
And you kind of felt it in your entire being, and yet weren't afraid of the unknown.
Yeah. I just knew at that point that this is what I had to do. And, there were a lot of situations where there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of second guessing, and there's a lot of struggles even within that. That's the interesting thing. They never tell you that part of it. They never tell you that once you cross the other side and you get into that place, there's still going to be a lot of suck in there.
Well, yeah, you're completely accountable and responsible at that point for you. Every choice you make is about you and furthering whatever it is that you're in the process of doing.
Yeah.
And can be a really stressful place. We were talking about pushing and pulling energy earlier, and it really, at that point, and I think you've realized this too, that there's a place where you step into the river and you let it flow, and you're not pushing and pulling anymore, and you're paying attention. It's like you come into that understanding of, oh, I'm experiencing a little bit of quantum entanglement, which kind of may be evidenced by synchronicities that you begin to pay attention to, and little signs and stuff along the path that lead you in certain directions, and you feel your way through it. There's this I presented a notion recently of that we can't think our way through a system built on vibrations. We have to sense our way through them.
Yep.
And with the words that you're using, that you're talking about sense making on a whole different level than just sense, than having things make sense, right? You're taking it down into the spell casting.
Yeah, there it is.
Right.
That's the word. That's the stuff.
And spell casting is bad. However, words have power. We've known that for a long time. The right
Absolutely.
words can really create or destroy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I kept thinking, as I'm doing this, at the time it was, about, again, it was very, very ego driven, and it's interesting to admit that now, but it's part of the journey. I look back on it and say, okay, well, why was I doing this? Because I wanted them to come back and say, it was so great. It was so brilliant. It was so funny. They loved it. And it couldn't have been done unless it was for you. And they pat myself on the back. And then I realized later that was all crap. What it was really all about was just channeling and letting them get a taste of it so that they can do it too. That's what it was really all about. And now everything I do, every speech that I write, every time I speak in front of a group, everything, the first question I ask myself is, where's this coming from? What place is this coming from? If it's coming from a place of love, let's rock and roll, baby. It's going to be great. And if it's not, why? Why isn't it? And what can I do to pivot it back? Yeah.
I had an old friend that on the other side now, this amazing individual. He was written up in Time magazine, 71 issue as a prophet of his own time. He helped start the waterbed industry. But years later, when I met him, he was in a much different place. He was in the late 60s. But he did say something to me that really stuck. And that's, there's no ego without we go. And it sounds kind of goofy to begin with. And yet that's exactly what you just expressed, right? Even though you realized that your ego was involved, there were certain needs and desires and wants that you were engaging, ultimately it was getting out of the way of that and allowing that flow of energy to connect you and your audience, which ultimately served the audience. So there's the we go, right?
Yeah.
So it's just so amazing how we often miss those things, and we tend to try to dismantle the ego instead of elevate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And that's really a lot of the reason why I wrote the book. It's a lot of the reason why I'm kind of doing what I'm doing now, and it's kind of shift away from that a little bit, but it's that same kind of idea, which is acknowledgement of it. Like, yeah, I was gonna say, I'm an eternal being trapped in an ape suit, and the apes got to eat, and that's just, it's the nature of the beast. And there are no amount of hours that I can dedicate on a Himalayan mountain to becoming one with everything that will change the fundamental reality that the ape needs to eat.
Right.
And it's just, I think that's a hard thing to make peace with once you've, and I use this very, very delicately, but crossing the other side, still having to have that recognition, like, all right, well, I haven't gone anywhere, still here. This is still Geoff, so still gotta.
Those patterns are so deeply embedded in our genetic codes because of, this is generation upon generation upon generation, right? And these are really deep in our genetic codes, our neural networks, and the sensitivity that we have, and the direction that we have had as far as a race even. And now we're evolving, and there's this, or at least I see it as this next layer of the onion being peeled back or put on, either way. And it allows us to take this awareness that we have and share it in a little better way towards the betterment of all. And ultimately, to use a phrase that Robert Gilman talks about, it is harmony with self, others, and nature. Right? We've missed, that's the holistic system of our planet. We haven't even talked about the guys elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right. Which,
just our rock. Well, as they say, everything is local. So
right. Well, we think anyway, and
yeah.
It isn't. And even with quantum physics, most of it's space. It's all vibration. We have very little actual material. So, I am another you, literally. Right. We just have these, what I've learned from an experience I had as a teenager. I prayed to know what truth was and end up going into light and sphere of pinpoints of light and coming back. And the awareness that I came back from that with was that we're cosmic consciousness condensed into form, and there's that point of light, we don't know how big it is, that's inside of each one of us, and it bounces back and forth between here and the great light, and every incarnation. And we grow, we build upon that, our skill sets develop, our choices develop, and now perhaps maybe there's a collective, kind of like the cultural creatives from the 80s that now are in another cycle of coming up with, okay, now we understand a little more about how we're connected to everything, so let's figure out how to work together better and create or alter the existing systems to where this can be implemented, this kind of awareness and source code, if you will.
It's really amazing, and we're seeing it in such profound ways that are flying under the doom scrolling radar. And that's been one of the more incredible things, from at least my takeaway from 2020 in a lot of ways, was there were so many profound consciousness shifts forward that happened on the micro and macro level, that if you're paying attention, you saw, but if you weren't, you just think everything's going to hell, the whole world's collapsing, but it's there.
Well, it was I just remarried in 2017, so we'd had a few years to develop our relationship. We got married pretty quick, but it was just amazing. So 2020 rolls around, and back that same white light experience I was telling you about, I was told during that my reason for being here was basically to help facilitate a new world order, that it would happen in my lifetime. Now, this was on 11/11/1975. And so I've had all these decades going, okay, how, where, I don't see it, how could it, just kind of feeling lost. And then the pandemic hit. It was like, oh man, I felt it my entire being. Here's the beginning. And at that point, there were all of these others, like you're talking about, whether it was virtual, in person, mostly virtual, because what I'd hoped for was the sequestration and the obsession on self-hygiene would get people to turn inward. Yep. And clean that up first, because you can't, if you don't love yourself and treat yourself like you love yourself, then you can't really participate that in the world, or at that level of the world. So what you're saying is ultimately what's happening, right? That people are rising up, and we still don't know where we're going to go, but we're starting to ask the questions as to how and what might be possible, and what can we coagulate together, and because it is kind of pulling stuff out of nowhere and saying, okay, let's see if this works.
It's astounding. I saw it in my personal life. I've firmly come to the belief now that nothing happens by accident, and I was never a proponent of that, but I think I'm a convert after this cascading series of events that happened that ultimately got me on to a Zoom in March of last year, put on by someone in the UK. And she's a healer. She's a great, I'm going to connect you two, by the way, you two, peas in a pod.
Okay, cool.
And she's amazing. And she decided to put a Zoom together for all of us lonely souls who were stuck in quarantine right when this thing began. And just to create a community where we can all go and commiserate and bitch and support each other and have a lot of love and a lot of laughs. And it was amazing. And I ended up meeting some of the most incredible people of my life. And we formed this community of people all over the world, from the US to the UK to India to Australia, Spain, everywhere in between. And each one of them ended up becoming characters in my book. And they became characters that the main character, Sean, ends up meeting on his journey. And each one of them are trying to leave 2020 in their own different ways. And 2020 in the book ended up being this, like I said, it became this place kind of between life and death, which in a lot of ways, 2020 really was in our kind of dense reality. In a lot of ways, it really was that place between life and death. So it was very metaphorical, but a lot of myself was in that Sean character, meeting all these different people as he's trying to leave 2020. So the book, I would say, came through them as much as it came through me, truly.
I'll validate that in my experience. You can, the way, from my knowledge, as connected as we are in our consciousness, when you have like minds and you have affinity towards each other, and you've had the chance actually to see each other and look into each other's eyes, now you have a connection. And it's more than just that casual, when you've had a chance to see each other, feel each other, there's a resonance, there's a frequency, there's a compatibility, and there's a capacity that we have to build upon that on other layers or levels of consciousness that most of us aren't necessarily aware of. But
Yeah.
I do find that people like us tend to explore the realms a bit more, and kind of ask questions about what else, and probe and explore and see what's out there. And with quantum physics, even there's a couple of guys, and you like these guys, Nepi and Close. They wrote a paper called the Triadic Dimensional Distinction Vortical Paradigm, and their posit was that, and this was a quantum physics paper, theory of reality kind of stuff. They posited that space, time, and consciousness were all tethered across 9 dimensions, which I found really interesting. They wrote this in 2010, or published it 2010, and it corroborated an experience I had back in 1989 called a multi-plane awareness technique, in which the man who founded it, wrote it, discovered it, his name is William Swigart, was also 9 planes of consciousness. And so, these numbers and patterns and things, when you begin to look for these things and look for where they're showing up, somehow they're connected. And these were 2 big ones for me, because I had the experiential side, and I'm like, okay, so how does that fit on the science or philosophical? I heard recently that we didn't really have the word science until last century.
Yeah.
So it was all philosophy before then. So there's this philosophy of other realms and things, and it's even showing up mathematically now with the proofs that they had in order to do their whole quantum physics model. So I found that to be tremendously exciting, as okay, now we've got some proof, or at least posits from educated people, right, that know stuff.
Yeah.
Well, way more than you and I do on the mathematical side.
No doubt about it.
And yet here they are, right? So we do at least have the intelligence to glean the summary of that, right? Or the narrative. We may not understand math, but the narrative is explained well enough to where it makes sense. Right?
Absolutely.
So how in your work and your view, how do you see that kind of awareness and discussion evolving or happening? Because it's not one that's really too common from my experience.
No, not terribly. And I think it's incremental, but I think it's incremental in very subtle ways too. I think a lot of people are asking more questions than they used to, but I think the questions are starting on and I don't want to say a small level, because that's condescending. That's not what I mean at all. But on I would say, personal, egoistic level, like, all right, so this pandemic really made me think, what the hell am I doing in this job? Am I supposed to be married to this person? Why am I living in this city? Really starting to ask those questions that they were just asleep and wouldn't ask before. And those are the first questions to get into the next level of questions. And I think, and you're seeing more and more and more of that. And I'm meeting more and more people who are transcending that level of questioning into that next level of, well, if I'm not meant to be in this job, what the hell what am I meant to do, period? Why am I even here? And questions that would just never cross their mind, because they think before, well, I know why I'm here. I'm here to, get married and have kids and be an accountant and save enough to retire comfortably and then die and leave my kids a decent amount. And that's why I'm here. That's it. And then if I'm a good boy, I'll go to heaven. If I'm a bad boy, I'll go to hell. And that's why I'm here. And then they're not asking those questions, but now a lot of people are. And that's really cool to see. As a matter of fact, I'm actually going to be starting next week, actually after Thanksgiving, a local meetup group here in Northern Virginia called Nova Seekers. And I want to create a space for people who are beginning to ask those questions, or have been asking those questions for a while and just don't know where to find their fellow travelers who are asking those same questions.
And I think that's a key, is because most of us, myself included, I felt like an outlier for many years, being on the fringe and having an understanding. And whenever I open my mouth up, people kind of step back. And you had a friend of mine that ran a project for IBM for a number of years and had something like 50,000 programmers he was responsible for. He and I got to know each other, and one morning we were having coffee and we were talking about perceptions, and he was concerned because for me, and I wasn't really aware of it, and he says, I'd like to say, to offer that, when the impression people get with you after listening to you for, a few minutes, it is just a big question mark, because you're all over the place.
Yeah.
And I can do that, right? And that's kind of what he and I connected on, because we met at a World Futures Forum breakfast initially, and he'd worked with Carl Dakin in forming Tom Fry's what was it called, the Vault. It was the first co-working incubator space in the United States, in Littleton, Colorado, I think. And this guy speaks 6 languages. He's been all over the world. So I really respected that, and yet I was kind of taken aback, and yet I had to admit, yeah, I can see, because I don't have a label for me. How could somebody else, right? I've never been inside a box. I like reading labels, right?
They're so limiting. It's like, how does it capture it?
Yeah. So it's and now that's all coming into play, because I'm able to talk with so many different people on so many different topics and subjects and levels, that it really makes it fun for me now.
Yeah.
And I know if I'm having fun, you are too.
Better believe it.
Right. And if we're both having fun, where 2 or more are gathered, then everybody else must be having fun too.
It's a party. Yeah. Let's roll.
Right.
Yeah. That's the good stuff right there.
So how, you mentioned that you're, creating this, how in your mind, from a holistic systems thinker perspective, might some of the things that we could anticipate seeing coming up, or that the audience may be looking for in order to connect themselves to something greater?
So I would say the first thing is to really tap into flow as best as one can, and to think about what lights up your soul, like truly. In the book, I talk about this idea of sparks. You see people's sparks light up, and sparks are different for everybody. For old ladies, it could be sitting around knitting, and it could light up their sparks, and there's this flow that comes into their knitting. And for some people it's writing, and some people it's poetry, some people it's playing basketball, and everybody has that thing. And I say the more we can tap into that, the more it's going to open up more. So really think about that. What lights up your soul? What animates you? What gets you out of bed? What gives you something to look forward to? And then use that as kind of a true north to guide you somewhere else. Go all in on that. Really, really cultivate that. But something else I'm really working on now, and I'm actually creating a new workshop around it, and working on a new book around this, is this idea of how do we unlock flow on an individual and collective basis through the power of irreverence. And I am really excited about this.
You see the look on my face, man. It's like, wow, that could be really interesting, because the freedom in that, one of the things that I learned years ago is that everything is sacred and nothing is sacred. Right? So there's that seeming paradox within the truth that we've forgotten about, and irreverence doesn't mean being disrespectful.
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, what this really does is it pays more homage to who and what we really are and what everything really is. Because I believe one of the greatest recipes for misery, and I've experienced this, and I know others who have too, is taking the roles that we have on this stage a little bit too damn seriously, and taking the rules and restrictions and regulations and all these different things, and having to play the part so well, and having to tell somebody, you know what, you can't cry at a funeral. You can't. I know you want to, but you can't. And someone said, well, that's disrespectful. But is it? I mean, really think about this. Is it? Is it? And then the more you really think about it, it starts to shift the perspective on it a bit. And
Well, when you allow yourself to just be who you are, it's like whatever you resist persists, first of all, right? We all know that.
Yep.
And so this kind of opens up the door, or at least for me anyway, in my way of thinking of being irreverent. By the way, I'm a card carrying irreverent.
I figured.
Or irreverent, right? So
Reverend. Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, when I first got it, I thought, it was an accomplishment and a desire, just so I could have that experience of writing a dissertation as to why.
Mhm.
Okay? So, but when I got it, it's like, I'm irreverent, but I feel more irreverent than reverent. And so I had to play with that in my own head, and me from way back where my intention is pure, and that I really do want to be there. And I'm kind of a interesting sort as you are. Not everybody can handle all the different directions we're going, and being able to pick up the comedic stuff during it too, which makes it all the more fun. And I'm sure you'll agree with this. You kind of pretty much said it. If you're not having fun what you're doing something wrong.
Absolutely. And I've put this out there, and this is controversial, but I love controversy, so what the hell. I said, if we want to talk about this idea of spirituality and holiness and so forth, I say a night at a comedy club is a vastly more spiritual experience than Sunday Mass with a priest who's putting the entire pew to sleep. Because one is tapping into the flow and the majesty and the energy and the magnificence of creation, and the other is an active negation of it.
Perhaps even the feeling of elation brings us joy and laughter, right? And I've been in those sessions in church where it's not exciting.
We've all been there. It's brutal. It's rough.
Yeah. And so maybe that ought to give us an indication that maybe we're either gathering under wrong pretenses, or this isn't really where we ought to be, that things might, but that's what we were supposed to do. We've done this for millennia.
Absolutely. And I've seen this, and this is in no way to disparage anybody who is a follower of any kind of traditional religion or anything. In fact, I had this incredible, I would say, moment hit me on a road trip I was on a few weeks ago, where this idea just became crystal clear in my mind, that there are many different paths to the truth, and they manifest in many different ways. And those who have, to use the 2020 word, pivot to this way of saying, you don't have the truth because you haven't found my way. And a lot of people in the spiritual realm talk about people who follow traditional religions that way. And I don't.
It's not my way. It's Yahweh, man.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's
you know what I mean?
Like, it's only
It's very kind of smugly spoken, like, well, you're just following an ancient book, but I know the real truth. There's so many different paths to it. And so when I say this idea of like a mass or anything, this is not a knock on Catholicism, but it's a knock on those who are not communicating the truth from a place of joy, from a place of passion, from a place of soul animation, but rather from a place of rigidity and tight boxes and rules and playing the part in the role. And you can't ever get anybody excited that way. And yet when my cousin got married, he got married in a classic Italian Brooklyn Catholic church. I mean, right out of central casting from Saturday Night Fever. And the priest was incredible. And he gets up there and he's busting my cousin's balls on his wedding day. And everyone's laughing hysterically. And he's doing it. And he said, now, Russ, you and Megan are going to have a beautiful life together. And Jesus is going to be looking over you. And half the time, Jesus is going to be looking down at you. Say, really, Russ? Really? But I known you since you were a kid, so I'll put a word in with the man upstairs. Take it easy on you, right? So he's doing this, and he's bringing this kind of holy thread into it, but he's animating the whole crowd. And what he's saying is really sticking with everybody. But he's doing it in a way that's lighting us all up, and it was an unbelievable experience.
Oh yeah, and those kinds of people do that everywhere. They're like edutainers. and they liven the crowd. And you can feel them. You can feel the conviction, the authority in them, whether they're speaking or not. A lot of times, right? You just feel them in the room.
Yeah, and those are the same people. We talked about this idea of it coming through them, and any one of them would tell you that whatever's happening in that moment is coming through them.
Absolutely.
The connections they're putting together, the energy they're speaking with, the way they're able to respond to things so quickly, they're tapping into something.
And you and I have a direct experience of that over the years, because we've become aware for people that are just, let's say these are the ones that have done the internal quest. They've used the self-hygiene and the sequestration to go inside and start cleaning up, and they're beginning to come out to see what's there. How can you or would you advise them as to what to pay attention to, or maybe what to anticipate or look for on a variety of sensory levels, as well as perhaps even what they might be experiencing on a visual level?
So I would say, as far as the experience goes, the sensory experience of it, I would say find a way to be in tune with what you intuitively feel is right, not what you think you should be feeling is right. Because there's going to be that moment, and don't feel like you have to force feed yourself into that what I feel is right place.
Is there a place in your body that would be resident?
I mean, I would say your gut, certainly, and I say follow your gut. And there's a lot of that too. So if you've had bad Thai food, maybe not, but maybe wait till the next day. But
well, that backs up what the Native American philosophy is, that the gut's your first brain. That's where you're connected to everything.
100%. And something else I would encourage too is everyone, I feel like, taps into it in a different way, and a lot of people are big proponents of meditation in the traditional sense, and that works for a lot of people. So I'm certainly not knocking it. It doesn't work for me. What works for me is getting in that place through a place of motion. So I will take long, brisk walks, and I'll listen to very upbeat music. I'll drive, I'll listen to very upbeat music, and I will tap into that same thing that people who are sitting still meditating will. So if you're somebody who wants to meditate, if you're somebody who wants to tap into that, but you're in that place where, I've tried it a million times, I can't sit still, I can't quiet my mind, don't torture yourself over that. Maybe that's not your path to get there. Maybe you have a different way. Think about a way where you do get there. Think about certain music that really tunes your brain into a place that almost takes you to a different planet. Think about activities, physical motion. Think about things you can do that don't involve necessarily sitting still and clearing your mind.
Yep.
Because that's just as valuable.
One of the things experientially that I offer is simply putting your fingertips together, being conscious of your breathing, deepen it, and feel your heartbeat in your fingertips. Now, it can be pretty much done anywhere, anytime. And when you feel your heartbeat in your fingertips, you're out of your mind. You're not thinking, you're feeling. And so that begins to open you up. And if the more time you can spend there, the quiet you are. And then over time, you can get like us where we can go to that space simply by choice.
Absolutely.
Regardless of what we're doing.
No doubt about it. Zen, this has been awesome. I'm really, really glad that we had a chance to do this. I really am.
Me too, Geoff. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. And I really appreciate your time and how you got here. And man, we got to do this more.
Yeah, we do. Absolutely. I'm actually starting a live show on LinkedIn in the new year. You are going to be my first guest, and we're going to bring down the house.
Oh, I'd love it, man.
Yeah.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
And it's going to be all about tapping into that through a reverence. And that's going to be like the core of the entire show.
Well, we could have some real fun with that.
We're going to. I can't wait.
All right. Man. Well, thanks again, Geoff. And namaste and in la catch. I thank you all for tuning into this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I'll see you next time.